As a reminder, in this room, you'll have development plan and mobility. So we'll give everybody another 90 seconds to kind of get a seat, get comfortable, and then we're going to get started. You can sit either in the front or at the breakout tables. We will be doing breakouts, so if you choose to sit in the front, you'll move kind of midway through the 50 minutes. But it's probably easier to see the slides from the front.
And this is not sustainability.
This is not sustainability. How do we get to the slides we want? Nothing's moving up there, so. Can I leave my slides here? Not that they have any notes on them.
Okay, I have. Okay, so I'll introduce me. I'll introduce you. I'll just do a little. Thank you.
We are your hosts. Okay, we're down to 30 seconds. There's still a lot of people standing. Jesse and Andrew are here? Yes. 10 seconds. I know, I can't see anything. Okay, I think we're going to get started.
Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for coming today and on this beautiful snowy day. My name is Leslie Gash, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Waterfront Toronto.
And I'm Pina Malazzi. I'm the Vice President of Design at Waterfront Toronto. And we're your hosts for the next 50 minutes.
So we're going to move quickly through our introduction, which is around our goals and objectives, a little bit on the evaluation framework. And then Jesse and Andrew will be presenting from Sidewalk Labs. There'll be a question and answer period. And then we're going to, most of you are already in the tables, which is great, but that's the part that we're really excited about is getting the feedback from you all for this. So you've seen this slide before. This is the context. This is what we call the Quayside L, and 12 acres, mostly owned by Waterfront Toronto, but with some city-owned land and some small bit of private ownership. The next slide, the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan. So when we're looking at the evaluation for the Master Innovation and Development Plan, the MIDIP as we call it, we're looking at three things: whether it meets our goals and objectives, whether it aligns with the planning framework, and whether the business case is solid and that it's in the public interest. So what we're talking about here today is about our goals and objectives and the alignment with the planning framework. So the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan was approved in 2003, and it acts as a framework to guide waterfront renewal. It's an ongoing phased effort and is part of a much larger city context. So it's broken down into 4 parts: a network of spectacular parks and public spaces, so significance of the public realm here, a destination for tourism, celebration, and enjoyment, and includes reserving the water's edge for public use and public spaces at the bottom of the north-south streets. It ensures the preserving views of the lake and wants it to reflect the industrial heritage and the dock wall legacy. The next is making connections and removing barriers. So we want this neighborhood to be part of the city fabric. So it's to reconnect the city with the waterfront and bring the lake into the city, and emphasizes north-south and east-west connections. Promoting a clean, green environment, so sustainable modes of transportation, flood protection for the portlands, and the renaturalization of the mouth of the Don River. And the fourth piece is creating dynamic and diverse communities, places of beauty, quality, and opportunity for all, accommodating a large range of development forms for people to both live and work in a neighborhood setting. The next, I think Jesse mentioned it earlier, this neighborhood overlaps 2 precinct plans. First one is the East Bayfront Precinct Plan, which was approved in 2006. And it essentially, very similar principles to the secondary plan, water's edge promenade, visual connections to the water, special places at the base of Jarvis, Sherbourne, and Parliament, which is where Quayside is, supporting pedestrians, cyclists, and transit. Queens Quay is an urban boulevard. Animated ground floors. Waterfront Toronto has ground floor animation agreements with a lot of its development partners. We want it to be a great place for people to walk, to get services, to eat in restaurants. And you saw the renderings earlier, how animated Quayside can be, and that's what we're really in favor of. And then a mid-rise form that steps down from the Gardiner to the waterfront to preserve views and, of course, environmental sustainability. And then the second precinct plan is Keating Channel, approved in 2010, essentially says the same kinds of principles, but in this case, it talks a lot about the connections to the adjacent neighborhoods, and that as this will become the gateway to the Portlands. Sharing a wide range of open spaces and the infrastructure with the adjacent neighborhoods. And then a variety of built form and architecture, mid-rise, but with some carefully placed high-rise elements as well. So I'm going to hand this over to Pina now.
As Meg and Leslie both mentioned earlier today, we have been working to develop a series of objectives upon which we can evaluate the MIDP, Master Innovation Development Plan. And they are sort of bucketed in a series of different ways. So you heard a little bit about the must-haves from Meg this morning, one of which was around the area of mobility, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we also have objectives in a series of different, what we've been calling at all the previous roundtables, pillars. So in the area of housing and affordability, buildings, mobility, community support and inclusivity, sustainability, public realm, economic development, and digital technology. So I'm gonna take 2 minutes to just zoom in a little bit on the mobility objectives, given that this particular breakout is around the development plan and the mobility plan. Starting with the new mobility must-have. So we actually have 5 different objectives in mobility, the first one being new mobility. So this is really about improving connections to the transit network, including resolving any issues related to first and last mile, increasing the use of electric vehicles. As many of you who've been involved in the planning process know, our Villiers Island precinct plan has an objective of achieving near zero carbon emitting, near zero in terms of carbon emissions from the transportation system. So if Quayside's going to be a model for how we do projects in the future, there's a real opportunity to learn some lessons at Quayside that we can apply to achieving that objective. Leveraging potential benefits of autonomous vehicles. Is there a way to plan for autonomous vehicles so that if and when they do come, they aren't sort of driving around completely empty, increasing vehicle miles traveled over what we have today? Reducing the cost and climate impact and convenience of the transportation system for the average user, but also for the movement of goods. And we'll hear a little bit about freight movement today. I think Jesse already alluded to it a bit this morning. And lastly, ensuring open data protocols for sharing of mobility data that's collected for the purpose of creating a more efficient mobility system. So the other 4, so these are equally important. They're not in the must-have bucket, but equally important objectives around walkability, active transportation, transit, and network management. So starting with walkability, creating a dynamic street network that really accommodates all modes and prioritizes active modes of transportation, so both pedestrian safety, but also, and moving into the next one, active transportation, really encouraging cyclists and creating a comfortable space for cyclists to commute, so that we can actually think about this as a real mobility option year-round. And then in the transit bucket, assisting in the delivery of potential funding for the already approved waterfront transit line, and connecting to and enhancing the city-wide transportation system. That's really critical, I think, to achieving the objectives of Quayside really feeling stitched into the city. And then lastly, in network management, exploring options for network management tools. They make better use of transit infrastructure and significantly increase trips on those modes that I just covered. So I think with that, we're going to turn it over to Jesse and Andrew, who are going to walk us through our presentation. So you're up first, right?
Thanks, Pina and Leslie. We just heard a lot about the overall site plan, and we're gonna, in this session, really kind of dig in more deeply into transportation. Of course, any site plan, any way that you're approaching the planning and development of a community, the way people get around is one of the most fundamental parts of that plan, and then that's what we wanted to then really focus on. Andrew leads that work here and wanted to kind of show you the thinking that we're doing. So take it away.
Thanks, Jesse. Good morning, everyone. When we began to think about what we wanted for the mobility network for Quayside, we started with, we've got these three principles. Firstly, we want a transportation system that permits you to get to or from Quayside in a fast, reliable, cheaply, with limited impact on the environment. And what that means is that we want to make sure that no matter what mode you are coming to, you can get to Quayside in all those ways without benefit necessarily of a private car. So we're not opposed to private cars, but we want to make sure that all people, no matter how they are getting to Quayside, they have a mode that will assist them in that trip. Secondly, and allied to that principle, we want to make sure that over time we can, wherever possible, reclaim space from the mobility network for the public realm. That we think that in contemporary cities, often there's a misallocation of resources. We would like to try and set that allocation into a better place for people, and so that wherever possible, if we can take space away from private automobiles and give it back to the public realm, we would like to do so. And thirdly, while no one can know what the future can bring, we have some ideas for what the future might hold. We want to make sure that anything we build in the near term is future-proofed, is ready for the transportation and mobility innovations that we think are coming in just a few short years. So that is the principles, and I hope that when you've seen what we've got in mind, you think that the system we've designed fits that design. This is a map of the area around Quayside, and what you can see is the blue area represents the area with which you could reach Quayside. The center pin is there at Parliament Plaza with a 15-minute walk. So we think that we can achieve this through, is one of the things, as we will see, we are going to invest heavily in making sure that the public realm, the pedestrian spaces, are as high quality as they can be, not only within Quayside, but also surrounding it. It's particularly on our minds, the underpass between Parliament, under the rail berm, and then the Gardner is, to be honest, forbidding today. It can be dark, it can be grim, it can be noisy, it can feel unsafe. But we think that by investing in making it, and other public spaces, airier, lighter, we can make it so that people want to travel through these spaces. They want to take pedestrian trips. So now overlaid over the 15-minute walking is now the 15-minute cycling, which we're going to achieve, we think, by building onto the already excellent biking facilities and dedicated cycling infrastructure that Toronto already has. We're going to make sure that that is extended and ramified throughout Quayside so that cyclists are capable of getting around easily and conveniently. Now, 15 minutes is a reasonable goal for a novice cyclist, but I'm sure there are some people here who consider themselves to be advanced cyclists. So for them, here's a 30-minute overlay, which is a reasonable goal for a commute or for a pleasure trip to Quayside. As you can see, we're expanding the network of cyclists quite a bit, and that's in part because of not only the bicycling infrastructure I described, but also some of our innovations. We do aim, for instance, to make sure that all of our cycle paths are ice-free year-round with underground heating, which means that even in the off month, even in the colder months, it'll still be possible to cycle safely to Quayside. So the next map is about transit. And if I was going to show a map on this scale, it's like how far you could get to Quayside by transit, I'd have to show the whole city. So let's shift slightly. As you heard earlier from Pina and from Jesse, we looked at the existing Toronto plan for light rail across the waterfront, and we don't see any way that we could improve on that. We agree that LRT, or streetcar, across the eastern waterfront is the best way to deliver transit service to the waterfront. So that is what you can see in the middle left there, is the approved Toronto plan for streetcar, or more properly speaking, LRT, because across the eastern waterfront it's going to be operating in its own right-of-way. So between Quayside and Union Station and the forthcoming East Harbour hub in the eastern part of Toronto, it'll be simple, cheap, convenient, and easy to reach Quayside from anywhere in Toronto by way of the TTC. So that is the overview. Let me drill down some. First and foremost, if you are traveling within Quayside or nearby, we want you to be traveling as a pedestrian. So unfortunately, at this scale, it might be hard to make out, but you can see that we've plotted out how long it will take to travel as a pedestrian from point to point within Quayside and nearby. And they're reasonable travel times. So when you are traveling within Quayside, you can travel through pedestrian means. I should add, though, I mean, when you are thinking about a mobility network, it's not only important to think about all the modes, it's important to think about seamless transition between modes. So again, the scale perhaps does not do it justice, but if you peer closely, you can see that we've marked on this map bike share stations, e-bike share stations, scooter share stations, so that it'll be possible to begin or end a trip as a pedestrian and switch to any of the other modes for trips beyond the city or within Quayside. We want people to be able to travel seamlessly no matter what mode that they choose to take. That's, as I said, that's one of our design principles from the beginning. The bike network. So as you can see, if you know the bike network today, you already know the Martin Goodman Trail runs along Queens Quay. In the plan that we have, it'll be extended across Parliament Slip and all the way to Cherry Street. It'll be complemented by the existing city plan for a multi-use trail for cyclists along Lakeshore. So that's two dedicated and, dare I say, high-speed cycle networks on an east-west orientation. Complemented by, for cyclists that want to go north-south, there are plans to have that infrastructure at Sherbourne and at Cherry. So the site is girdled, if I can use that word, by high-speed transit bike infrastructure. And for lower-speed cycle infrastructure, for people that are willing to move their cycles at a lower speed, there will also be north-south connections at, from left to right, Bonnycastle and Small and Trinity. So that's how you get to Quayside by bike. What do you do with your bike when you arrive? Well, we're going to have ample bike infrastructure not only to move, but also to store your bike. So again, I apologize for the scale, but you can see that in terms of short-term bike parking, we're going to have 500 spaces just at bike racks, which includes, this is one of my favorite parts, you can see in the slip there, we have a barge that is strictly for bike parking. This is something we've seen in Amsterdam, and we'd love to bring that feature to Toronto. But we also have got bike hubs. And so if you can see there, underneath what we call Site 2, the building in the top center, we have the interchange, about which more in a minute. That is where you will be able to park your car over short-term spaces. If you drive in to Quayside, you will, by car, we certainly have got facilities for you. You can park at the interchange for short-term, for day use. You can arrange for long-term parking off-site. But you'll be able to alight from your car, and then you can pick up a bike that you've stored at the bike hub. You can go to bike share. You can exit and go immediately board the LRT station. Again, it's that seamless multimodal trips that we are aiming for. But no matter how you want to get around, there is opportunity to cycle as well as walk, scooter, transit. We are trying to do it all and do it at once. So speaking of transit, the orange line represents what we think the TTC is going to have. So it runs along Queens Quay. Off to the west, it's coming along Queens Quay from Union, reaches Cherry Street, and then it'll either go north over what is now the Distillery Loop and into the broader streetcar network at King, or south down to Villiers Island along Cherry Street. So there's a few things to say here. Firstly, if you are an eagle-eyed transit fan, you will know that the 72 bus is missing here. And that's because We are not the TTC. We do not aspire to own or operate any transit. So consequently, we have ideas about what the TTC might want to do, but we're certainly not going to dictate to them. They will, in their wisdom, assign service as is seeing fit. So we think that the 72 will go. We could be wrong. The 65 we think will still come down from the north and serve the site. So there will be bus service as well as LRT service to Quayside. But the other point to make is that we won't say so much about this today. Is that we want to work with the approved plan for LRT in Toronto. So we're exploring ways that we can work with our public sector partners, with the city, with other governments, to accelerate delivery of LRT service, to accelerate the delivery of the plan that the people of Toronto have already said that they want. So that's at broad strokes. What does it feel like? This is a vision of what Queens Quay might feel like in 2025. So to orient yourself, south is on the right-hand side of this image. So you can see there's ample pedestrian space. We've got the Martin Goodman Trail there, which is broader than it is to the west. We've taken more space to give to cyclists, so it's a more comfortable and safe ride. Not pictured is the snowmelt systems I described earlier, but they're there, they're under the ground. We've got the dedicated area, the dedicated right-of-way for LRT. We have the traffic lane. Now we have a single traffic lane. So in this vision, Queens Quay has got one lane for conventional auto traffic that's westbound. So, and it's by taking away what is normally two lanes that we're able to allow for more expansive public space and more expansive bike lanes. You can see just to the north of that one travel lane is the dynamic curb space. Let's drill into that a little bit. So Jesse alluded to this earlier in his plenary discussion, is that heretofore we have defined how space is used in the street by hard-coded infrastructure, by curbs. But new technology allows us new opportunities to dynamically assign space to where it is needed. So in the image on the left, we have spaces where cars can pull in, pick up and drop off their passengers, park if necessary, but there's no paint on the ground. There's no bollards that define that space. Instead, it's done through lights that are embedded in the pavers and movable street furniture. So at times when we need pick-up and drop-off spaces, that is what the street will accommodate. But at other times, say non-peak times, like a Saturday morning, when there's less of that sort of traffic, we can use that same infrastructure to very easily reorient the space so that space is reclaimed for the public realm. So now that space where there used to be cars can now be pop-up kiosks, it can be street furniture for resting, there's no limit to what we can do with that space. And these dynamic curbs are one of our innovations that we're really excited about the opportunities it creates to turn a mobility system not merely into a conduit that moves people from place to place, but also a destination in its own right. So if you are driving in Quayside in 2025, if you are coming from the west, our anticipation is you will come along Lakeshore, and then you can either proceed along Lakeshore and turn left at Small and double back along Queens Quay. But much more likely, you will turn right at Bonnycastle. You will enter the interchange I described earlier, where then you can park your car, and then you can change modes. You can be a pedestrian, or you can switch to transit, you can switch to bike share or scooter share. If you're coming from the south or from the west, it is slightly more complicated. As you can see, as the arrows come by, you would expect them to turn left at Small, but unfortunately, they don't do that because it's simply not appropriate to have a left turn intersection at Small so close to the intersection at Parliament. It would be unsafe, and safety is one of our guiding principles. Pardon me. So instead, if you are coming from the south or the west, rather than turning left, you have to proceed a mere 150 meters or so, and then you can turn left at Bonnycastle, and you can proceed into the site. So you'll notice it says 2025, and you're probably asking me, well, what's going to happen in the future? Well, what we think is going to happen in the future is autonomous vehicles. What is an autonomous vehicle? We use that term, sometimes we talk about legacy vehicles. Legacy vehicles are the sorts of cars that we are all familiar with, and the most salient feature is that they're driven by humans. An autonomous car's salient feature is that it is not. It is driven by a computer. And there's all sorts of reasons why that's great, but the one that I'd highlight for you today is that the robot that is driving the car will always obey the rules of the road, will always obey the speed limits. It will be safe. It will always treat, because it cannot but treat, other users of the space with respect and with priority for their safety. Now, these aren't going to be ready in 2025, or certainly they won't be ubiquitous. They'll be around. But by 2031, well, we think that there are going to be a lot of them, and so many that we can actually begin to design streets for them. So once we get to 2031, what we can do is we can start thinking about reorienting the space for autonomous vehicles only. And again, the reason for that is because, as we heard earlier, we're so committed to Vision Zero and safety principles. As a cyclist, as a pedestrian, I want to share the road with autonomous vehicles because I know they're not going to hit me. I know that I am safe. We think that's the future. We want to make sure that Quayside is ready for that future. So we're going to have roads, southbound, eastbound, westbound, the roads that are for AVs only. And we couldn't be more excited about what that future is going to hold for us. Now, I should take a step back. Everything that I've described for you today is premised on the idea, as you've seen in these earlier slides, that there's no road connection between Parliament and Lakeshore, and that cars cannot cross Parliament Slip. We must acknowledge that's not what the precinct plan calls for today. The precinct plan today calls for something more like this: a direct connection between Parliament and Queens Quay East and Queens Quay West. There's a lot to be said for this. It facilitates connectivity and easy liquid, fluid movement throughout the system. Call that one end of the spectrum. Another end of the spectrum is what this whole presentation has been premised on, is instead deprioritizing connectivity and fluidity in favor of taking space for the public realm. That's what you have here. Cars that are coming south on Parliament stop at Lakeshore, and then they have to fan out to the east or west. There's no connection at Queens Quay across, and there's no connection from Parliament down. Call that the other end of the spectrum. Thank you, Pina. It's a spectrum. There's lots of opportunity to find compromises between these two different visions. Here's one. Still no connection south from Parliament to Lakeshore, but there is a connection across Queens Quay. Or no connection across Queens Quay, but yes, you can go from Parliament directly to Queens Quay. Or yet another compromise. You have Parliament, you have Queens Quay, but you also have Parliament Plaza and the wonderful public space that Jesse described for us in the plenary session. It's clear, you'll have gathered from this presentation, that we have an idea about which one of these we think we prefer, but it's by no means a settled matter. And so we are continuing, and we will continue to work in the coming weeks, not so much months, but certainly weeks, with our partners at Waterfront Toronto, with the City of Toronto, to determine what the best arrangement, the best alignment of streets is that serves the most users and gives the most benefit to all. Time is short today, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. I haven't said anything about our freight systems. I've said nothing about electric vehicles. These are things that we could talk about, but there's so much to talk about in the mobility system. We decided to highlight the things that we thought were most important. I'm certainly willing to answer any questions you may have on any element of the mobility system. And Jesse is here and Pina is here. They can also answer questions about all of these things. So let me wrap up by saying that our goal, above all else, is a mobility system that is not about prioritizing vehicles or prioritizing bicycles or prioritizing pedestrians as much as it's been about prioritizing people. Streets are for people first, not for any one mode. We want modes to be something that you don't worry about. You slip between them as your needs dictate. And we also hope that what we've created is a place where the mobility network is as much a destination in its own right. It's a place where you enjoy traveling for its own sake, not merely because it gets you from A to B. that is what we've tried to do, and I hope that we've persuaded you that this vision was not only a good one, but that we've delivered upon it. And so with that, I'm happy to take your questions. So I think that there is I don't know if we've got people circulating with microphones. Maybe not.
I think we'll just ask you to speak really loud. So
I guess that's,
I mean,
most efficiently, that's what we'll do. Well, what we'd like to do is look at best practices with how it's been done elsewhere in the world. So something we are thinking about in this vein is you may be familiar with the Hudson Yards development in New York City, which was a case where value that was going to be created by a transit arrangement was then used, was captured, and then borrowed against to build transit in the near future. So value capture is a well-known principle for allowing transit to get built. How we're going to do it, we don't know, but we've been looking closely at value capture schemes. We're talking to our partners. Hopefully we will be able to find some way to use these innovative financing schemes to deliver on this thing sooner rather than later.
I'm going to jump in to say that there are two folks in blue t-shirts with microphones. So if you want to put up your hand, and they can come over to you for questions. Go here. Okay.
Yeah, my question is about the routing of Queen's Quay and Parliament. And when I look at this plan, I think it's sort of on face clear that it is better for Quayside in the orientation you provided. I guess what my question is what is the impact on the area to the east, and how do you make your approach also better for the area to the east?
That's a good question. And when you think about that, you're right, is that removing that connection between Parliament and Queen's Quay does allow for the area around Quayside to be more pleasant. The cost of that is that there's going to be more congestion on some of the surrounding roads. Part of our analysis is that there's two things that we're doing. One is that congestion along Lakeshore is already not great. It's going to get worse with time. But there's a limit to how congested it can get. So what's going to happen is some marginal trips are going to drop off. That is not much of an answer, but it has the benefit of being true. Here's a better answer. We are working so hard to allow for multimodal trips to Quayside and beyond. So if the LRT does get built, that's obviously a great boon for Quayside. It's a great boon for everything to the east, because you've got now service all the way along Cherry, you got service all the way along Commissioners, you got service up to East Harbor. There's a lot so if we can accelerate the LRT, that really improves the connectivity of the whole network in the eastern waterfront. But there's also, by knitting together the cycling network, to the extent that we can create multimodal shift, and we think that we can. Jesse spoke about this earlier. We think that we can bring a lot of trips away from autos into other modes. That benefits Quayside in particular. It benefits the eastern waterfront as a whole, and to a lesser extent, it benefits the whole city.
Yeah, and just to reinforce, I think we believe that this plan has a lot of merit, but we are very, very much in the middle of exploring alternatives and think that there might be some great options there as well. So there's no sense that we're sort of fixed on this. I guess the thing that's important to reinforce, just in terms of the approach that we've taken, it is not that our approach has been, how do we make Quayside special and not think about the surrounding areas? It has been very considered in that regard, and in terms of the connectivity, it is making the assumption that Lakeshore is the east-west connection to connect to the Portlands, and that Queen's Quay is a neighborhood road, which has often been how it has already been conceived. And in this regard, it is more similar in a way to the looping system that you have on King Street, in terms of vehicles, and thinking about sort of neighborhood access as opposed to Queens Quay as a thoroughfare. So I think it's not about in any way breaking connectivity. It's about thinking about this in that broader context.
And I will add that those explorations will happen sort of between now and the next roundtable, and at the next roundtable, we'll have an even better answer to that question. So, next hand.
Thank you. My question is, the driverless car is going to be public transit only, not for private car, right? And also, what is the obstacle to for this? I understand it until 2025, and will be full of those all driverless cars in 2031. Is that because of 5G or data that putting that late age?
I don't want to speak for the autonomous car community because I'm not an autonomous car specialist, but my understanding is that autonomous cars right now, you could get in one and ride and it would solve 80%, 90% of road situations. But when it comes to something as dangerous as a car, 90% won't cut it. You need to get to 100% before you're willing to deploy them in any sort of area, and that takes time. So if we care about people's safety, which we do, and that's we as sort of the regulatory community as at large, autonomous vehicles won't be permitted on the streets until we can be certain that they are completely bug-proof. And with all the goodwill in the world, I don't think we're going to be there by 2025. But by 2031, and if they can come faster, we're all for that. But we're trying to be realistic in our projections.
Okay, next question. Try and get through as many as we can. How about?
Yeah, hi. I got here a bit late because of the snow, but in that street where you said there was only one lane for cars going west.
Yes.
And there was like a lot of like sidewalk space and additional space. I've read before that there were going to be heated sidewalks or something like that. My question is more because that's a lot of space, but a lot of the time, throughout the year, it's slushy or snowy and stuff like that. So, what's that space going to be used for when it's snowy and nobody's there? Well, unless it's going to be heated and stuff like that, which I may have not heard.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. So some of the spaces will be heated. In particular, we're quite focused on the cycling track because we think that's something that we really want to promote, really safe year-round cycling in this area, and then sort of strategic zones within the sidewalks and crosswalks. The other thing is that the idea of layering on other ways to kind of clear snow and to kind of manage climate in those areas. So one of the other concepts is something where, in a way, the building facades can expand and protect from weather. So you have sort of more sidewalk space that is available for year-round activities and especially solar season activities. So how you actually make that sidewalk a really vibrant place year-round is really important. There's also the tree canopy, which protects from the climate in different ways, and we see that as something that can be very lively in all seasons.
We will take one more question, and then we'll start the breakout. So I don't know, where's someone with a microphone?
Hi. So I know there was the Queens Quay redevelopment immediately to the west of this development. What, I guess, kind of lessons learned are you incorporating into the new development that we're talking about today?
That's a great question.
Specifically about mobility or more broadly?
More about mobility, because I know that area, sometimes there's some conflicts, particularly between people crossing the street and the bicycle track. And also, well, I guess you've been working on getting cars not going into the streetcar tunnel, but
I'm happy to answer that, and I think, in particular, so one of the things that, very concretely we mentioned is expanding that cycle track from 4.2 meters to 5 meters. And that extra space we think is important for the experience of cyclists in that area. In terms of the design of the intersections and the crosswalks is also where sort of the different approach to paving is actually really important. It allows us to introduce lights into that paving surface, so you have much better signaling for cyclists and pedestrians, sort of awareness of their relationship to each other to create much less risk of conflict. And then the overall street design is actually narrowing those crosswalk spaces and making very clear how different people can use different spaces at different times, so that we really can make it the best experience possible for everyone.
And I will just add a couple things vis-a-vis Queens Quay West. Waterfront Toronto continues to explore, ways we can go in there and continue to optimize the street. With respect to the streetcar tunnel, our partners at TTC have done quite a bit of work over the course of the last 6 months, including adding gates, which only the LRT vehicles have the sensor to open those gates. So lots has happened with respect to that particular issue. And then with respect to the kind of conflicts at the crossings, I think one of the things we're noticing is that in plan view, when we had the best of intentions in terms of the amount of space for pedestrians right next to the push button. 2.4 meters seemed very generous, but I think it's a bit of a victim of its own success, and the number of people down on Queens Quay are just like so tremendous during the summer. So we're looking at ways to really increase the amount of space for pedestrians to stack so that they don't end up spilling into the bikeway and into the TTC right away. And I think you'll see some changes over the course of the winter and spring, so that next summer we're kind of optimized with respect to that. So with that, maybe that's a way to transition into the breakout table. So if everybody who's sitting up front here can move to a table, I think you'll see there's someone with a blue t-shirt at every table who's gonna walk you through a series of questions over the course of 15 minutes. And then we'll be back up here in 15 minutes so that we can have a quick report back from all the tables. I'm interrupting to give you a 3-minute warning. So 3 minutes, and then we'll take some report back.
Can I have your attention, please? I'm sorry to cut you off, but the next session is actually going to be starting back here in about 5 minutes. So if anybody wanted to, this is going to be repeated 3 more times. So if people felt like they didn't get enough of this session, they can come to one of the others. So if we could get 2 tables just to report back, that would be great. Any volunteers?
Someone must have something super
How about-
interesting they want to
yeah.
share.
How about Sarah?
We have one
How
right
about
there.
your table? Would you like to report back?
Oh, one over here.
We have one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Volunteer.
Great.
And then we'll do that one in the back there. Yeah.
Hi there. So my name is Ryan, and I'm going to go over a question, what the parts we liked first. A lot of the stuff we liked had to do with the extension of the lake into the actual Quayside project. Really liked how it was brought up, and really liked the idea of having that pedestrian area there. Additionally, we like the idea of flexible streets and not having the curbs. In terms of what our concerns are, with those 2 things, the first thing with the flexible streets is how you're going to make sure that you're keeping the public up to know and make sure that they are aware of how the streets are being used. A lot of people get familiar with their surroundings, and if you're constantly switching it, how do you make sure that they're aware of how that's being used? With respect to the autonomous vehicles, we all agreed that's a great idea, and 2031 is 100% like probably where it's going to be going, but electrification is happening first, so how do you build that extra infrastructure for electrical vehicle charging? And if it's going to be quick charging, where do you have those quick access, quick charge spots? Because those are more fixed infrastructure, so this goes against your flexible idea. And then in terms of the actual public transportation, we really would like to see seamless integration with the public transportation stuff. So with the e-bikes and the bike system and the TTC, if you could unify that with Presto. I know you're not the TTC, so that's obviously a bigger problem, but having something like that where you can incentivize that switching between transportation models would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So our tabled, we had several. We were very excited about the fact that there are less cars, more transit, more accessibility. We had questions about how we deal with the actual conditions of the ground, or how we deal with tourists, because there are lots of tourists right now. So would this plan solve the issue with tourists walking on bike path like we have actually on Queen's Quay? Very exciting about the heated sidewalks, but we had questions about now when you have the snow melting or the sidewalks being heated, like the leaves being melted with the water and everything, how will it impact the drainage and how it will go to the water? What would be something planned to make sure the water is always clean, things like that. About what was missing, we thought about the water transportation as a public transportation. So boats crossing the channels, instead of just having right now, all the water taxis and concerns with the safety for the kayakers or boats on the water, but also just a matter of not doing the whole walk to go on the other side and just taking the boat as a transit and get to the other side. So we thought that was missing. We had a talk about the road network on Parliament Plaza options, and about the different possibility that will evolve in the future. So the flexible infrastructure is important. We had concern about the bridge where the bike is not represented. Of course, if you have a walking path with pedestrians walking there, you can assume that there will be some bikes, especially knowing that there is a school, and so you can allow children to get on their bike and cross this bridge with their bikes too. And I think that's all.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. I think there are workbooks that everyone's been given. We encourage you to keep going through the day and make sure that these are collected. It looks like Haban is very anxious to have us hear one more insightful comment. Very quick, please. We want to move you to your next space in time.
Okay, I just want to say that this is the vision for the future. I'm a little dismayed to see that we're still talking about private passenger vehicles here. In my opinion, if this is my vision, all passenger traffic and cars would be cut off at Lakeshore. Queen's Quay would be public transit, mass public transit only, and you have that entire area there for foot traffic, bicycle traffic, with no private passenger vehicles there. We should be looking to improve density, not building infrastructure that caters to private vehicles. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping. So we are going to move to breakout number 2. So you're welcome to stay here and hang out with us for another 50 minutes. But if you're not interested in doing that, there are 3 other sessions outside in the foyer. There's affordable housing and social infrastructure, digital governance, and sustainability. And they're in rooms 703, 705, and 707. If you go outside, it'll be pretty self-explanatory. So thank you so much, and we'll see you around.